In this lecture, we shall study Marx, particularly his understanding of religion based on his social analysis. So, in order to make it clear for us, I will divide this lecture into 6 unequal parts. I will begin with Marxian framework of social analysis. Then I will discuss with you one of the important concepts of Marxian social analysis called the concept of alienation, a term which probably you are familiar with. Very often we use that in our discussion, the concept of alienation. But of course, in the case of Marx, it has a specific meaning from within the socio-political and economic reality. So the third point we will take up for discussion is how religion mystifies this alienation. Fourthly, we will talk about why Marx thinks we need to emancipate ourselves from religion. We need to free ourselves from religion. As a fifth point, we will have, as usual, some critical comments. And finally, we will take up some of the questions that emerge from Marx's interpretation of social analysis and the conclusions he draw for religion. Marx was born in 1818, that means the early 19th century, and died in 1883. Now, Marx was born of Jewish parents. In fact, his father was a very pious Jew. So, we can understand the background in which he was raised. Now, let us begin with Marxian framework of social analysis. Marx proposed a theory of change. Now, what is this theory of change is all about? According to him, human history evolves, and this evolution happens in a predictable manner. There are stages which can be predicted in this evolutionary process of human history. Not only that human history evolves in predictable stages or through predictable stages, but they evolve to a predetermined end. There is a particular goal towards which human history evolves. So, in other words, this evolution happens in a linear fashion. Of course, he introduces another concept. I'll come to that in a moment. So, there is no cyclical understanding of the human history. We don't come back to where we remain, but we make progress in human history. And these stages can be predicted. We know in advance this is how it is going to evolve. And we also know to what end, to what goal does human history evolve. The second aspect of this theory of change for Marx is these changes are dialectical. Now, what do we mean by dialectical? In order to understand the idea of dialectical, we have to understand a certain philosophy of Hegel, an idealist philosopher who has inspired Marx. In fact, many of the contemporary thinkers would say all political thinkers who came after Hegel are necessarily Hegelians. They are either right-wing Hegelians or left-wing Hegelians, but all political thinkers are necessarily Hegelians. I mean, that's what some commentators would say. Now, let us try and understand what this dialectical means. When he says all changes are dialectical, what he implies is change takes place through contradiction and the resolution of contradictions. In other words, contradiction is the mother of change because reality is fundamentally dialectical. Now, let us say position A is the thesis. Position B would be the antithesis. Now, there is a contradiction. A is the thesis, B is the antithesis. Now, there is a contradiction that emerges between this thesis and antithesis. Then you create a resolution of contradiction by positing a C. You create a C. That becomes then, for its term, thesis, to which D is antithesis. then something new is created, that is F. In other words, dialectical means there is first a negation, and that negation is again negated, which gives rise to a new negation, which is again negated. So throughout the history you can see contradiction, and this unfolding of contradiction brings change. Now, it may be a little difficult for you to conceive this in an abstract way, but when we apply how Marx applies this dialectics, it becomes clear. Marx, in fact, took inspiration from Hegel with regard to this dialectical thinking. But Marx at the same time opposed Hegel because Hegel thought this dialectics happens in our idea, in our mind. I have one point of view, there is an opposite point of view which contradicts this point of view, and there is, in resolving this, a new idea emerges. That idea is now contradicted by another idea. In trying to resolve that idea, a new idea emerges, and that idea is further contradicted. So it is all series of contradiction of ideas. So that is why Hegel is idealism. So, in other words, for Hegel, when he speaks about the evolution of human history, it is about evolution of human consciousness. Consciousness means that which produces idea, the human mind. Insofar as our consciousness changes, history changes. When our ideas change, history changes. So basically Hegel was trying to understand how consciousness functions. So I have one particular approach to, for example, political life. I may be taking a particular political opinion, and then I realize that is contradicted with another opinion. Now I resolve both, and a new political idea emerges. So you see, it's all about idea, and this idea gets translated into actual change in history. So ideas are primary according to Hegel. So basically the physical world in which we live, the world that we create, not the world that is created, not in that sense of physical world, the world, the social world we create, is just an extension of the idea. So society is just idea objectified. Now, for Marx, he thought Hegel stands on his head. I mean, he has got it wrongly. Instead of standing on feet, he stands on head. So he had to reverse this Hegel. So it is not so much the idea that influences our action, what we do. It's not that influences events in history. It's not that way we think enables the way we live. It is exactly the opposite for Marx. It is the way we live, the way events we do in history lead to the way we think. This is a new perspective that Marx brought into the Hegelian dialectics. For Hegel, ideas lead to action. In other words, if I think in a particular way, then that finds expression in my action. For Marx, it is exactly the opposite. The way I live, the way I do things, that shapes my thinking. So, in other words, for Marx, idea doesn't come first. Our actual life comes first. Therefore, the material existence is primary. Therefore, we must begin analyzing the material existence. Hence the famous statement that was said about Marx. Marx in his own lifetime was very miserable. He was a pauper. I don't know if you know about his life. In fact, he began thinking about social analysis when his daughter had died. Marx did not have money to bury his own daughter. He was so poor. So Marx went to the library and started thinking, why is that some people have more than they need, others we don't have even enough. So you can understand for Marx, therefore the material condition of my life, that influences everything else. So the question that why emerges from the fact that his own material existence, that he was poor, that he couldn't bury his daughter, that gave him to this thinking. So you see, the thinking is determined by your actual life, not the other way about. Therefore the famous, so when Marx himself, when he died, there were only 3 people for his funeral. So he was not known at all at that time when he died. He led a very miserable life. He was absolute pauper. He lived in absolute poverty. One of his friends, Engels, was the one who financially helped him a bit. So Engels was there at the funeral. If you didn't know the name Engels, normally you should know Engels is very commonly known. Anyway. So Engels, in his funeral, obituary, the eulogy, he made this famous statement: if humanity may forget everything of what Marx said, it cannot forget one important teaching of Marx, namely, man must first eat, drink, have clothing and shelter before he can engage in art, philosophy and religion. What matters first is that you eat, drink, have clothing and shelter. Your material conditions for existence must be first addressed and fulfilled before he can engage in art, what elevates your mind, philosophy and religion. So therefore, the first imperative is you should ensure your basic needs. This is the indispensable and necessary condition. So therefore, if you want to ensure the basic needs, what is the most important human activity? The most important human activity is not religion, but it is economics. Economics is the base for everything else because it conditions all other things. If you don't need to worry about your food, if you don't need to worry about your shelter, then obviously you can come and sit in theology lecture. If you need to worry about your food and shelter, forget about theology. You would be looking for how you can get your needs met by making some money. So economics is the most important human activity. That's why we need to begin our analysis with economics, because that conditions everything else. Therefore, in a society, Marx thinks economy is the basic structure, the base structure on which everything else can be built. All other non-economic factors are built on this basic economic structure because that is indispensable, necessary, because provides a condition for your material existence, for your food, for your clothing, for your shelter. So this is very important. Depending on what kind of base structure you have, you will build other structures, which we call the superstructure. What kind of philosophy you develop, what kind of theology you develop, what kind of political relation you develop, all these things. So change takes place in the base structure out of contradiction. So you remember this idea of how does change happen? It's always out of contradiction. Now what is this economy all about? For Marx, economy basically means the mode of production, because production is important for your material needs. And therefore, you need to look at what is the method or the mode that is employed in the production. So the mode of production for Marx has two components. The first is the means of production. Now, what does Marx understand by the means of production? So this mode of production, as I told you, has two parts. The first is means of production. Means of production involves everything that helps you to have production. In other words, it is society's ability to produce. So the means of production include all that the society has in order to make production possible. You need raw materials, for example, in order to make production. It's not enough that you have raw materials. You need factories. But you also need investment, capital, the money in order to make these raw materials used in the factories to convert them into the product of use. So you need raw materials, factories, but also capital. Capital means the money that is invested, what you invest in order to make this production possible. But that's not enough. You also need another important component to that is the human labor, human work. So the means of production means society's ability to produce, and this ability involves all that the society has, namely the raw materials. It should have some factories in which the raw materials can be converted into objects of use. And then it is not that you just have these things, you need investment in order to make this happen. Money, capital. And then you also need human labor. Any of these things, if it is missing, then the means of production is incomplete. Then the second aspect of this mode of production, it has two components I told you. The second component is the relation of production. Now, what does Marx understand by relation of production? By relation of production, Marx means that there is a relationship between those who own the means of production and those who do not own the means of production, at least certain means of production. Who are the ones who own certain means of production like raw material, factories, and the capital? Who own them? Marx calls them as bourgeoisie. In other words, the owners of the means of production. In modern term, we call them the capitalists. So these are the guys who own the means of production. They have the raw material for what they need. They have the factories. Also, they have the capital, money to invest in the production. So they own it. They have it. They have it in their possession. The workers don't have any of these means of production. The most what they have is just their labor. So therefore, there is a class distinction between two groups of people. One is the bourgeoisie. Now, if you are not familiar with the term, I shall type it for you. Bourgeoisie is those who own the means of production, and the other one is the working class. Marx has a specific term for the working class, which is called proletariat. You might have heard of these terms, probably may not be very clear about what it means. So when people speak about bourgeoisie and proletariat, it is very simple. Bourgeoisies are the ones who own the means of production. The proletariat are those who don't own the means of production, except their labor. Now, obviously, in simple terms, you can think of therefore the bourgeoisie as economically rich people, the proletariat as the poor economically. Okay, so in everyday language, that's what we can say. So technically, they are called bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Now, relation of production refers to the relationship between these two classes. Now, there is always an antagonism between these classes of people, owners and workers. Why is that? The reason is very simple, because the mode of production evolves towards a realization of its fullest productivity capacity. Always there is a demand from the bourgeoisie that the capacity for production is very high, and that is possible only when you really extract the labor of the laborers. This would obviously create antagonism, because what is desired from the bourgeoisie, those who own the means of production, may not meet what the need of workers is. So there is a conflict. There's a conflict of interest that creates antagonism. Antagonism means a kind of a feeling of enmity. I'm sure you know this term, but in case if you didn't know, in simple terms, it only means a sense of conflict that emerges because they have different interests in this whole mode of production. Now, there are different kinds of mode of production possible. Now, you remember, once again I come back, mode of production has two components, the means of production and the relation of production, meaning to say the relationship between those who own the means of production and those who don't own the means of production. Capitalism is one mode of production, because this mode of production is based on the private ownership of the means of production. So who owns the means of production? Individuals, the private individuals. It is not collectively owned. Normally a few private individuals own the means of production. And the capitalists produce objects of use called commodities. What you use and objects that you use are called commodities. You must be knowing this term, but in case if you have difficulty with any of this word, I shall put that down. So capitalists produce commodities for the market so that it can be sold. And in order to stay competitive in the market, they must extract as much labor as possible from the workers at the lowest possible cost. So how can you stay competitive in the market is you try to somehow appeal to the consumers. How can you do that? You have to give a competitive price. And if you want to give a competitive price, what are you going to do? You get maximum work from the laborers, maximum producing ability from them, but pay the minimum so that you don't lose your profit, but you can still keep your business going. Very simple as that. This is the logic by which all the capitalists work. So the economic interest of the capitalist lies in paying the worker as little as possible. In fact, just enough to keep him alive so that he can be productive. So there is no interest in the life of the worker. So the capitalist, all that he is interested in is making a huge profit for himself. And that is possible, and if you want to stay competitive, you have to extract the work as much as possible, and then you can just pay him enough in order that he survives, so that he can still be productive. So the workers come to understand that their economic interest lies in preventing the capitalist from exploiting them in this way. So you see the reason for antagonism is evident. The capitalist wants to exploit as much as possible the labor force from the working class, from the proletariat. And the proletariat, they want to protect their economic interests by preventing the capitalists from exploiting them this way. So the social relation of productions are inherently antagonistic. The conflict is inbuilt in this, in this mode of capitalist mode of production. So this gives rise to a class struggle. Class struggle means a struggle between two kinds of class, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And Marx believes this class struggle will lead to the overthrow of capitalism by the proletariat. In other words, the proletariat will at one point in time overthrow the capitalists, and they will replace the capitalist mode of production with a collective ownership of production. In other words, the means of production would be collective by the working class. And this is called communism. And this kind of communism will have a classless society, a society which doesn't have class. Those who own the means of production and those who don't, because all of us would be, owners of the means of production. All the working class will be owning the means of production. So everybody has to be worker, everybody is also the owner. So that is a communism. So public ownership is what facilitates a classless society. So Marx thought, now you apply the Hegelian understanding of change by contradiction. Marx thought human history evolves by this contradiction in 5 stages. Originally there was a primitive communism. The primitive communism is everybody was owning everything in common and everybody was working as well. It is something like what you will think about the early Christian community, the ideal community that is presented in the Acts of the Apostles. I mean, something similar, something analogous, not exactly the same, but the idea is there. So there is no class there. Everybody is equal. We all own, we have everything in common. We all work collectively, and that is a communism, primitive communism. Then this was followed by the ancient mode of production. The ancient mode of production was brought in with the understanding of slavery. There were some who were owners of slaves, others who were slaves. So the owners of slaves, they owned the means of production, including those days it was probably mostly agricultural and other things, not industrial kind of a thing. They owned land, they owned other resources necessary, and the slaves worked for them. So the slave owners and the slaves, and that was of course obviously antagonistic as well, because some are slaves, just slaves, they have no rights whatsoever. This gave slowly way to, with some kind of this contradiction, gave way to feudalism. In the resolution of this contradiction, feudalism emerged. Feudalism is that you have got some group of people who are landlords, aristocrats, and others who are laborers, who are serfs, the landlords and the serfs. If you don't know, the aristocrats and serfs is the distinction that is normally made in the feudal society. For a long time, India has been a feudal society, and I think most parts of India is still a feudal society. There are some who are aristocrats and so on. Then, obviously, there was a change. There was a contradiction between the, aristocrats and the serfs. They are the servants for the aristocrats. There was a contradiction, and that was resolved by this capitalism. Now, capitalism does not go by your feudal structure. Now, capitalism is brought in with the Industrial Revolution. So, it is no longer how much land you have, how much factories you have, how much, because the mode of production changed. So, it was not merely the agricultural products, but there are other products that came to exist as objects of use value. So, in capitalism, you have this bourgeoisie and proletariat. And the last stage is the communism, which is the overthrowing of capitalism, and public ownership of the means of production. All will be proletariat, and all will be owning this collectively, and all will be working together. You see, therefore, history evolves through predictable stages. From primitive communism, you see ancient slavery, then feudalism, then capitalism, and it has a predetermined end. At the end, we will arrive at communism, period. So Marx was very certain about it. So it has in a technical term, this approach is called teleological approach. Telos in Greek means, don't worry about this word in case you find it difficult. Telos in Greek means the end goal, the end result. So teleological means the study of the end purpose, the end goal. So it has a teleological approach. So everything will have finally towards this particular end. Christianity is teleological, if you didn't know. Look at the story of our Christian narrative. There was original paradise, there was a fall, and there is a redemption. Then there is new heavens and new earth. The original creation, which was kind of lost, the paradise lost, but there is by redemption it is gained. Now there is a new heavens and new earth. So it finally reaches to the new heavens and the new earth. So if you look at Bible from this point of view, it begins with creation of heaven and earth. It ends in the book of Revelation, the creation of new heavens and new earth. It's very teleological. It is towards that we are all marching. So Hegel is teleological partly because he is Christian, very essentially Christian. It is a Christian approach, and Marx has appropriated that. Well, instead of Christian, it is in a way Judeo-Christian. Okay, it is also having a Jewish component to that. So what Marx changed it into, not in terms of Hegelian idea, but in terms of actual life, material existence. So that is the creativity of Marx. It has a final end towards which the history moves. Now, if that is clear for you, how this mode of production, in capitalism it works. In different society, it worked differently, the mode of production. Capitalism, it worked in this particular way of the class conflict between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, which will finally lead to the final stage of overthrowing the capitalism by the proletariat by taking up ownership collectively of the means of production. Now, it is in discussing this, Marx introduces this concept of alienation. What is alienation? Alienation means you are somehow, made stranger to what you yourself create. So the first aspect of alienation is work is objectification of self. So this is quite fascinating idea. Now Marx is not the only one who said that. There are many others who think that way. What you do in the work is you objectify your own self in your work. Let me explain that. There is a fundamental difference between the human labor and the animal labor. The animal labor is always done under compulsion. The compulsion can be internal or external. The internal compulsion is when the animal feels hungry. When the animal feels hungry, it works. It works in terms of hunting. It goes on hunting no matter what it does to get food, survive. There is an internal compulsion that comes from within. Humans may share some of these aspects, yes, but not just that. External compulsion is when animals are compelled to work by the humans. For example, you make the bulls work, you make the donkeys work, you make the horse work, you make all these animals work. So there is an external compulsion on them, so they work. They are not doing work freely and spontaneously. Human labor, on the other hand, according to Marx, is spontaneous, it is free, and it is directed to yourself. We do have compulsions. It's not that we don't have compulsions. So to have food, we also have to have work and so on. Yes, generally. But the labor is basically about a certain self-conception and a sense of well-being. To give you an example, if you know somebody who is very much fascinated about creating some tools, some works. I know there are some carpenters, they would be spending hours making sure the perfect design and the perfect way in which the particular object they are making, whether it is a chair, whether it is a table, whether it is even a small cabin or even some artistic work. Why are they doing that? What they are doing is they are seeing themselves externalized in that work of themselves. Somehow something of them is present in that work. So we often say, when you look at some object, I am sure this is made by this person. You see, we can make out. Something of that person gets revealed there. There is a certain way in which the person is externalized into that work. That is very specific of human labor. In other words, by working on a particular matter, the humans can convert into not merely into objects of use value, but they also see themselves externalized into that. So labor is a kind of a personal creation of oneself, also a certain way certain way in which one projects one's own identity into that. So labor is not merely a means of survival. It is, sure, we work also to survive, but just not merely that. So you somehow see, you are seeing yourself in the work that you create. So that is the uniqueness of human labor. However, capitalism, which is a private system of private ownership of means of production, deprives us of this, satisfaction of personal creation and the projection of my own identity into that work. That is denied. So the workers are reduced as workers only for the means of survival, and there is no personal satisfaction of work that is involved in that. Because after all, the products of labor do not belong to them. These products are expropriated by the capitalists and sold for profit. You see how the concept of alienation comes? So you become stranger to the product that you yourself make. In fact, that product is supposed to be projecting your own identity in some way. It has something of your own self that gets externalized into that project. But now you are made stranger because the capitalists simply take away that object from you and sell it for profit. So this is the important aspect, the work as objectifying your own self, externalizing your own self, or labor as externalizing your own self. So Marx also speaks about the different dimensions of alienations. In this capitalist system of private ownership, as we have already spoken, society is divided into two classes: the owners of the means of production and those who don't own. In other words, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. In this, class division, the working class, the proletariat, not only suffer impoverishment, more than suffering impoverishment, they are reduced to live in utter poverty, but more than that, they experience an alienation from the world. They are made strangers, your estrangement, alienation. I'm sure you know this word. You are estranged. You are made a stranger. In other words, you are not part of it. You are completely out of this whole thing. That is what is estrangement. People do have this kind of feeling, oftentimes when their own product is no longer theirs, it doesn't bear the mark of their identity, it is merely an object of use value that can be sold for profit. You are alienated, obviously. So this alienation, which the working class experience, has a fourfold aspect. In other words, they are alienated in four different ways. The first way, you are alienated from the object you yourself produce. Secondly, you are also alienated from the process of production. You have no way in which you can have a say in the process of production. The capitalist tells you what you need to produce, you simply produce. It's not something that you want it in a specific way, you have a certain imagination, creativity, and then you can bring that into it. No, this is what you are supposed to do it, period. So you are also alienated in that process itself. Thirdly, you are alienated from your own self. And fourthly, you are also alienated from other human beings. So these are the fourfold aspects. I will explain each of these aspects. The first type of alienation, as I told you, is that the worker is alienated from the product of his work. The very object that he produces becomes alien to him, foreign to him. And sometimes it even becomes hostile to him. Why it is? Because the worker puts his entire life into the object, logs and this labor is invested in the object, but yet the worker does not own the fruits of the labor, whatever the fruits are, whether it is economic value or aesthetic value or any value it has. He doesn't own it, it doesn't belong to him, because it is appropriated by the capitalist. So everything he makes contributes to a world outside of him to which he does not belong. You may be a very skilled mason, you may build a nice building. The moment you finish the building, you are locked out, you put the gate and lock him out. You don't allow him to step in and dine with you, do you? However, he has invested his creativity, his ingenuity, he has been seeing each meticulously, and then enjoy doing it. No. He contributes to a world outside of him to which he does not belong anymore. So he somehow shrinks, he is made small in comparison to this world of object that he has helped to create, but he cannot possess it. Strange. You create a beautiful statue, or you create a beautiful idol of a deity, and then once that idol is installed in a particular temple, you cannot even go and worship it, because you are a Shudra, you have to be out, period. Interesting. This is the first type of alienation. You are estranged from your own fruits of the labor. Not even to possess, you cannot even have sometimes look at it. The second type of alienation is you are alienated from the process of production itself. Because the work that you perform does not belong to you, but it is merely a means of survival for you. You are forced to perform for someone else. So, as such, the working activity is not something spontaneous. It does not somehow comes as a creative manner. Normally, labor is supposed to be very creative, but it simply exists outside of you and signifies a loss of your own self. You have no say in how you have to do it. You may love to do it in a particular way, but then the capitalist say, no, I want it this way, period. You simply do my business. You are paid for it, that's all you need to do. So in the process of production, again, you have no say, you are alienated. This is very simple to understand. The third form of alienation is from your own self or from your own human identity. For human beings, work amounts to a life purpose. Why? Because it is in the act of transforming the inorganic matter into create something is the core identity of human being. You see, for example, if you are from a farming family, you kind of have a nice garden, and then you plant trees, and then you enjoy seeing it growing. You see how you are transforming something into something else. That makes you that you are worth, a person of worth. That creates a certain identity of self-worth of the human person. So a person is what he or she does in transforming nature into objects through practical activity. But in the modern system of private ownership, the capitalist system, and the division of labor, the work is alienated from this essential source of identity and the life purpose that you have. So it is merely something, a means of survival for you. So you really don't. It doesn't give you any identity, worth, identity, of self-worth. You are alienated from your own identity in that sense. Fourthly, you are also estranged from other human beings. Why? This is because your product is owned by someone else. You begin to regard the capitalist who appropriated your own work as hostile, as inimical. So you feel antagonistic towards the entire system. So obviously you are alienated from other human beings as well. You are kind of angered, disappointed. So you think I am just being used here. So that is the last alienation. Now we have discussed about two important aspects of Karl Marx theory. The first one is this analysis of society, particularly the economics, because that is the base structure of the society. And then we said about how history evolves and so on through this inherent contradiction, of course, based on the material condition of existence. Then we said about the mode of production, in which there are two parts, means of production and relation of production. And the relation of production again is internally antagonistic. Then we also discussed about the alienation, which is part of this, how this antagonism leads to this sense of being alienated, sense of me being made somebody who doesn't belong there. Now, this is the general background in order to understand his religion. I will stop here, and then I will take up if you have any questions. Then I'll come back to his understanding of religion against this background.